My son left me in the Arctic snow, his voice full of venom. The polar bears will be happy to see you. But when he returned to base, I was waiting for him with a surprise that destroyed his world. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The fork trembled in my hand as Dwight's words cut through the warm Florida evening like shards of ice. We'd barely finished the main course when he dropped his bombshell. "Dad, you've been holding on to this old house too long. Time to pass it to the younger generation." I set down my utensils carefully, buying myself a moment. The dining room felt smaller suddenly, the antique mahogany table that had hosted 3 generations of Whitaker family dinners now resembling a battlefield. Through the French doors, I could hear the gentle crash of Atlantic waves against our private beach, but the sound offered no comfort. "This is our family home, Dwight. You were born here, your grandparents lived here." My voice remained steady despite the shock coursing through my veins. "Your mother and I planned to—" "Planned what?" Nadine interrupted, her manicured fingers drumming against her wine glass. "Harlan, be reasonable. We could modernize this place, make it profitable, turn it into luxury vacation rentals. The market value has skyrocketed." She spoke with the practiced efficiency of her former real estate career, each word calculated for maximum impact. I studied her face, searching for any trace of the woman who had once seemed to genuinely care about our family traditions. Dwight leaned forward, his expensive suit catching the light from the crystal chandelier. "Look around, Dad. This place is stuck in the past. Those family photos, the old furniture, it's all just dead weight." "Dead weight?" The phrase stung more than he could know. I glanced at the portrait of my late wife Mary hanging above the fireplace, her gentle smile now seeming to watch this unfolding betrayal with sad, knowing eyes. "You know what I mean." Dwight's tone grew sharper, more aggressive. "You're 72, Dad. How much time do you really have left to enjoy this place?" The ocean breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the salt-sweet scent of the evening tide. I'd always found that smell soothing, but now it felt suffocating. My son, my only child, sat across from me like a stranger, his cold ambition wearing the face I'd once kissed goodnight. "I'm 62, not 72, I corrected quietly. "And I have plenty of time left." Nadine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Come on, Harlan, let's talk numbers. This property is worth at least $8 million in today's market. Just sitting here, it's wasted potential." "Wasted?" I felt my hands clench into fists beneath the table. "This house raised you, Dwight. You took your first steps on these floors. Your mother and I read you bedtime stories in the library upstairs." "Honestly, Dad?" Dwight paused, and I saw something cold flicker in his eyes, something that made my chest tighten with dread. "I wish your days would end sooner." The words hung in the air like poison gas. My fist slammed against the table before I could stop myself, making the china rattle and wine slosh from overturned glasses. The crystal chandelier above us swayed slightly from the vibration. Silence fell like a curtain. Even the ocean seemed to pause its eternal rhythm. Nadine's eyes were wide with surprise, while Dwight sat frozen, perhaps finally realizing what he'd said. But the damage was done. My son had just wished for my death. I couldn't bring myself to clean up the dining room. The overturned wine glasses and scattered napkins remained as evidence of the evening's destruction as I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. Sleep proved impossible. I paced the hardwood floors, my bare feet finding every familiar creak and groan in the old boards. The moonlight streaming through the tall windows cast everything in silver and shadow, transforming my sanctuary into something alien and cold. On my nightstand sat a framed photograph from Dwight's 10th birthday. I picked it up with trembling fingers, studying the gap-toothed smile of the boy who'd once declared this house the most magical place on earth. "Dad, I'll never leave this house," he'd whispered that night as I tucked him in. "It's the best place in the whole world. We're gonna live here forever, right?" When had that bright-eyed child become the cold stranger who'd sat at my table tonight? I traced the glass with my thumb, remembering how he'd spent that entire birthday party giving tours to his friends, proudly showing off the secret passages and hidden alcoves that made this Victorian mansion so special. The house settled around me with its familiar nighttime symphony, the gentle groan of old timbers, the whisper of wind through the eaves, the distant rhythm of waves. These sounds had comforted me through 35 years of marriage to Mary, through raising our son, through the lonely years since her passing. I moved to Mary's vanity, where her silver brush set still caught moonbeams like captured starlight. Her photograph smiled back at me, from its place among her jewelry boxes and perfume bottles, frozen in time at 45, still beautiful, still wise. Mary, our son forgot everything we taught him, I whispered to her image. When did money become more important than family? The answer came in another memory, Dwight's wedding day 5 years ago. I'd noticed how Nadine's eyes appraised every room during the reception we'd hosted here, how she'd asked detailed questions about property values and maintenance costs. She'd been calculating our worth from the very beginning. Gradually, after their marriage, Dwight's visits had changed. Gone were the leisurely afternoons when he'd help me maintain the gardens or repair the old dock. Instead, he'd arrive with a notebook, measuring spaces, taking photographs, discussing upgrades that would maximize the property's appeal to potential buyers. I'd thought he was just being practical, planning for the future. I'd been blind to the truth. He was cataloging assets. Another photograph caught my attention, this one from our last family fishing trip before Mary's diagnosis. Dwight stood between us on the dock, his arm around my shoulders, genuine love shining in his eyes. That man still existed somewhere beneath the greed and manipulation. He had to. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, its bronze voice echoing through the empty house. Dawn was still hours away, but I felt a strange clarity settling over my thoughts like morning mist. If Dwight wanted to play games with our family legacy, he'd discover that his old father had learned a few tricks during 40 years as an engineer. I hadn't survived corporate politics and complex construction projects by being weak or naive. The decision crystallized in my mind as the first pale hints of sunrise touched the horizon. I would fight for this house, for Mary's memory, for the values we'd tried to instill in our son. If he'd forgotten what family meant, perhaps it was time for a harsh reminder. The phone rang just as I was finishing my morning coffee a week later, startling me from my solitary breakfast routine. The 7 days following our confrontation had passed in tomb-like silence. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits from Dwight or Nadine. I'd maintained my usual routine, morning walks on the beach, tending to Mary's rose garden, working on small repair projects around the house. But each activity felt hollow, performed by muscle memory, while my mind wrestled with the growing chasm between my son and me. I'd checked my phone obsessively those first few days, hope and dread warring in my chest each time it remained stubbornly quiet. By day 4, I'd stopped looking. By day 7, I'd almost convinced myself that the relationship was truly over. Then the phone rang. "Dad?" Dwight's voice carried an unfamiliar warmth, so different from the cold calculation I'd heard a week ago. "I hope I'm not calling too early." I glanced at the kitchen clock, 8:15 a.m. "No, I was just having breakfast." Good. He paused, and I could hear something rustling in the background. "Dad, I've been thinking about our relationship, about what happened the other night." My coffee grew cold in my hands as I waited for what might be coming, an apology, another demand, or something else entirely. "I want to invite you on a special trip," Dwight continued, his enthusiasm sounding forced yet eager. "The Arctic, Dad. Real adventure. Polar bears, endless wilderness, the kind of expedition we used to dream about when I was a kid." After our last conversation, I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. "Why now?" "Because I want to fix everything. We need a different temperature regime to cool our hot heads." He laughed at his own joke, but it rang hollow. "I've been researching this for months. Snowmobile tours through the Alaskan tundra, professional guides, the whole experience. Just father and son. Like the old days. The old days. When had we ever discussed Arctic expeditions? I remembered fishing trips to the Keys, camping in the Everglades, but nothing about frozen wastelands and polar bears. Sounds interesting. But why the Arctic? Why not? His voice gained momentum, as if he'd rehearsed this pitch. "You always said we should do something extraordinary together before—" He caught himself, but the implication hung between us like a blade. "Before I died." That's what he'd been about to say. "I've already contacted an outfitter in Barrow. That's Utqiagvik now, apparently. They'll provide separate snowmobiles so we can explore independently. GPS navigation equipment, emergency supplies, the works. It'll be completely safe. Something cold crawled up my spine that had nothing to do with the Arctic destination. Separate snowmobiles, independent exploration. Why would a father-son bonding trip require separation? How much Arctic experience do you have? I asked carefully. Oh, plenty. Remember that Alaska business trip last year? I spent extra time learning the ropes, took some wilderness courses. You don't need to worry about the technical stuff. I'll handle everything. I did remember that trip. He'd been gone for 3 weeks, supposedly negotiating some real estate deal in Anchorage. But now I wondered what he'd really been doing, what kind of preparation he might have been making. Dwight, this seems very sudden. Life's short, Dad, shorter than we sometimes think. Again, that ominous undertone. I can have everything arranged within the week. All you need to do is pack warm clothes and bring your sense of adventure. I stared out the kitchen window at the swaying palm trees, trying to reconcile the tropical warmth of my world with the bone-deep cold he was proposing. The contrast felt symbolic somehow, Florida's life-giving warmth versus the Arctic's deadly chill. What does Nadine think about this plan? She's all for it, says it's exactly what we need to reconnect as a family. His tone brightened artificially. She might even join us for part of the trip. That sealed it. Nadine would never voluntarily subject herself to Arctic conditions unless there was substantial profit involved. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about something else entirely. But what choice did I have? If I refused, I'd never know his true intentions. If I accepted, I might be walking into a trap, but at least I'd face it with my eyes open. All right, I said finally. Let's do it. Really? Dad, that's fantastic. I'll start making the arrangements right away. This is going to be incredible. Just you, me, and the most beautiful wilderness on Earth. The most isolated wilderness on Earth, I thought but didn't say. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of home, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the antique clock, the distant whisper of ocean waves. All the sounds I might never hear again. 3 days of research had turned my kitchen table into a command center. Arctic survival manuals lay scattered between weather reports and equipment catalogs, their pages marked with the careful precision of my engineering background. Each detail mattered when venturing into one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. Dwight arrived that Thursday morning with an enthusiasm that felt almost manic. He spread travel brochures across my notes like a conquering general claiming territory. Dad, I've found the perfect agency. Melissa Crane specializes in Arctic expeditions. She'll handle everything. Her office downtown gleamed with professional polish. Awards and certificates covered the walls, while detailed maps of Alaska dominated an entire section. Melissa herself radiated competence, her weathered face speaking of genuine wilderness experience. Gentlemen, I need to stress the dangers involved, she began, sliding liability waivers across her mahogany desk. Arctic conditions are unlike anything most people experience. Weather can change in minutes, temperatures drop to lethal levels, and rescue becomes impossible during storms. Dwight waved dismissively. Melissa, we're not novices. I spent 3 weeks in Alaska last year learning the ropes. We need separate snowmobiles for freedom of movement. No babysitting required. I studied the route he'd selected, noting how it led deep into uninhabited tundra. What about safety protocols, emergency procedures? Don't worry, Dad. GPS navigators will track our every move. Each machine gets its own communication system. Dwight's smile didn't reach his eyes. Trust me, I know all the ins and outs. Melissa's expression tightened with concern. Mr. Whitaker, I must insist on a complete safety briefing before departure. This is literally a matter of life and death. Of course, of course. Dwight signed documents with careless flourishes. Whatever makes you comfortable. But I noticed he wasn't reading the fine print, wasn't asking about the technical specifications I'd spent days studying. For someone claiming Arctic expertise, he showed remarkably little interest in safety details. Later, at a sporting goods store, his knowledge gaps became more apparent. He grabbed the most expensive gear without checking specifications, while I compared insulation ratings and battery life for emergency equipment. Dad, you're overthinking this. He hefted a GPS device without examining its features. We'll be fine with basic equipment. The salesperson, a grizzled outdoorsman named Jake, disagreed. Sir, basic equipment kills people in the Arctic. You want redundant systems, backup GPS, emergency beacons, survival shelters. Emergency beacons? I asked, my engineer's mind latching onto the concept. SOS transmitters, Jake explained, built into most modern snowmobiles. Red button sends coordinates to rescue services for 72 hours straight. Dwight barely listened, already moving toward the checkout. But I made mental notes, filing away each detail like blueprints in my memory. That evening, we reviewed the final itinerary. Our route would take us 40 miles from the base camp into pristine wilderness, far enough for spectacular wildlife viewing, Dwight claimed, but close enough for safety. Perfect isolation, he murmured, studying the map with satisfaction that sent chills down my spine. I pretended to share his excitement while calculating distances and rescue times. If something went wrong in that remote territory, help could be hours away, maybe longer during bad weather. Dwight, what exactly happened on your previous trip? He glanced up sharply. What do you mean? You've mentioned this Alaska experience several times, but never any specifics. What company did you use? Which routes? Oh, different outfit entirely. Smaller operation. They've since gone out of business. His answer came too quickly, too smoothly. This time will be much better organized. I nodded and smiled, but privately wondered if that previous trip had ever existed. Departure morning arrived with Florida's typical warmth, 77 degrees and humid air that made my heavy luggage feel even more cumbersome. I'd packed with methodical care, including backup batteries for every electronic device and emergency supplies that Dwight had dismissed as unnecessary weight. The taxi ride to Miami International felt surreal, palm trees and tropical landscaping flashing past, while my mind grappled with the destination ahead. Dwight chatted excitedly about wildlife photography opportunities, his smartphone displaying pictures of polar bears and Arctic foxes. This is going to be incredible, Dad. Just you, me, and the most beautiful wilderness on Earth. 2 flights and 8 hours later, we descended through gray clouds toward Anchorage. The landscape below had transformed completely. No more green lawns and swimming pools, just endless stretches of white broken by dark patches of exposed rock. The temperature hit us like a physical blow when we stepped off the plane. -15 degrees felt alien against skin accustomed to subtropical warmth. My breath formed clouds that dissipated quickly in the dry air, while the cold seemed to penetrate every layer of clothing. Incredible, I gasped, genuinely amazed despite my apprehension. I've never seen so much whiteness. It's like another planet. Dwight seemed less affected, though I noticed him pulling his coat tighter. Wait until we get to Barrow. This is nothing compared to true Arctic conditions. The connecting flight north took us over terrain that grew increasingly desolate. Mountains gave way to flat tundra, then to a landscape so uniformly white it hurt to look at. No roads, no buildings, no signs of human presence for hundreds of miles. Barrow, officially called Utkia das Vik now, materialized from the wilderness like something from a survival documentary. Low buildings clustered against the brutal environment, their windows glowing warmly against the perpetual twilight of the Arctic spring. Our guide met us at the small terminal, a weathered man in his 50s whose competence showed in every movement. Elmer Croft radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of keeping people alive in impossible conditions. Welcome to the Arctic, gentlemen. His handshake felt like grabbing steel cables. Nature doesn't forgive mistakes here. Dwight straightened defensively. Don't worry, we're not novices. I've been here before. Oh? Elmer's eyebrows lifted slightly. Which outfit did you use? Smaller company. They've since closed down. Dwight's standard response came out smoothly, but I caught the brief hesitation before he spoke. Son, you never told me details about your previous trip, I said, curiosity finally overcoming politeness. Different kind of experience entirely, more focused on business than recreation. His answer revealed nothing, while seeming to explain everything. Elmer loaded our gear into a heated truck, the warmth inside feeling like salvation after just minutes in the open air. Through the windshield, I watched a landscape that belonged in science fiction. Endless white expanses broken only by the occasional building or vehicle track. Temperatures holding steady at -31, Elmer announced, checking his dashboard display. Mild for this time of year, actually. Mild. I tried to process that concept while feeling the cold seeping through insulated walls and heated air. The base camp consisted of several connected buildings designed for survival rather than comfort. Thick walls, triple-pane windows, and heating systems that hummed constantly against the exterior cold. Everything built to withstand conditions that could kill in minutes. "Your briefing starts tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp," Elmer announced as he showed us to our quarters. "Safety protocols, equipment operation, emergency procedures. Nobody goes out there without completing the full program." Dwight nodded impatiently, already unpacking his expensive gear. But I felt a growing respect for this man, whose job involved keeping tourists alive in one of Earth's most hostile environments. Sleep came fitfully that first night, my body struggling to adjust to the alien environment. Outside, wind howled with a sound unlike anything I'd heard in Florida. Not the gentle whisper of ocean breezes, but something deeper, more primal. The sound of a world that didn't care whether humans survived. Morning brought the peculiar Arctic dawn. Not the golden sunrise of Florida, but a gradual lightening that seemed to emerge from the snow itself. I'd slept poorly, my body clock confused by the strange light patterns and constant mechanical humming of the heating system. Breakfast consisted of hearty fare designed for extreme conditions: dense bread, preserved meats, and coffee so strong it could wake the dead. Dwight seemed rested and eager, practically bouncing in his chair as he discussed the day's agenda. "Finally, some real adventure," he muttered, checking his expensive watch. "I can't wait to get out there." Elmer's briefing room felt like a university classroom devoted to survival. Charts covered every wall, weather patterns, equipment diagrams, emergency procedures mapped out with military precision. A collection of snowmobiles stood ready outside the windows, their bright colors stark against the white landscape. "Gentlemen, welcome to Arctic Survival 101. Elmer's tone carried the weight of absolute authority. "What I'm about to tell you isn't theory. It's the difference between going home alive and becoming another statistic." He began with the machines themselves, explaining every control and gauge with meticulous detail: throttle response in extreme cold, fuel consumption rates, engine warming procedures, technical information I absorbed eagerly while Dwight fidgeted impatiently. "Each snowmobile comes equipped with standard safety features," Elmer continued, pointing to a red button prominently displayed on the dashboard. "This is your lifeline, the SOS transmitter. One push activates a distress beacon that broadcasts your exact coordinates for 72 hours straight." I leaned forward, engineering instincts engaged. "How accurate are the coordinates?" "GPS precise to within 3 meters. Rescue services can literally walk right to your position." Elmer's expression grew serious. "But remember, transmission range depends on weather conditions. Clear skies, you're golden. Blizzard conditions can interfere with satellite communication." Dwight barely glanced at the demonstration. "Elmer, we're not children here. I know these machines better than many of your tourist groups. Mr. Whitaker," Elmer's voice carried a warning edge, "overconfidence has killed more experienced outdoorsmen than lack of knowledge. This environment doesn't care about your previous experience." But Dwight had already moved on, studying route maps with the intensity of a general planning an invasion. His finger traced the path deep into uninhabited territory, far from base camp, far from any chance of casual rescue. "This area here," he pointed to a remote section marked in red on the charts, "perfect for wildlife photography, completely undisturbed." "That's advanced territory," Elmer warned. "Beautiful, but dangerous. Weather can change in minutes out there." "Exactly what we want. Real wilderness experience." Dwight's smile reminded me of a shark sensing blood. Elmer distributed liability waivers and equipment checklists, each document stamped with warnings about Arctic dangers. I read every word carefully, asking questions about technical specifications and emergency procedures. Dwight signed everything with careless flourishes, barely scanning the fine print. "Son, you should listen to these safety details," I suggested during a break. "This isn't Florida boating." "Dad, relax. I told you. I was here last year. Learned from guides much more experienced than this." His dismissive tone carried an edge of irritation. But I noticed he couldn't answer specific questions about his alleged previous trip. Which company? What routes? What equipment? Every query met with vague responses and quick subject changes. The practical session outside drove home the brutal reality of Arctic conditions. Even with full protective gear, the cold attacked exposed skin like acid. My fingers went numb within minutes despite insulated gloves, while my lungs burned with each breath of air so dry it felt like inhaling sand. Elmer supervised our snowmobile practice with professional intensity, correcting steering techniques and explaining how machines behave differently in extreme cold. I followed instructions precisely, while Dwight showed off with unnecessary speed and theatrical maneuvers. "Mr. Dwight, this isn't about impressing anyone," Elmer called out. "Smooth, controlled operation keeps you alive out there." "I've got it handled," Dwight called back, executing a sharp turn that sprayed snow dramatically. As we completed final preparations, Elmer pulled me aside privately. "Your son seems confident. Maybe too confident for someone claiming previous Arctic experience." I nodded, my own doubts crystallizing. "He's always been ambitious. Sometimes it clouds his judgment." "Out there," Elmer gestured toward the endless white expanse, "judgment errors are permanent. Make sure you remember everything from today's briefing." Especially about that red button, I thought, filing the information away with an engineer's precision. Dawn brought deceptive beauty to the Arctic landscape. Crystal formations sparkled like diamonds across endless white expanses, while the aurora borealis faded into pale morning light. I strapped on my helmet and checked my equipment one final time, following Elmer's methodical checklist from memory. "Remember, stay within radio contact," Elmer called out as we prepared to depart. "Weather can change faster than you think out there." Dwight revved his engine impatiently. "We've got this handled. GPS coordinates, emergency supplies, full fuel tanks. What could go wrong?" Everything, I thought, but kept my concerns private. The first hour passed peacefully as we carved tracks through pristine snow. My snowmobile responded smoothly to every command, its engine humming with mechanical precision that appealed to my engineering background. Dwight maintained a parallel course roughly 50 yards to my right, occasionally waving enthusiastically. But something felt wrong with his riding pattern. Small things at first, sudden swerves that brought him dangerously close to my path, then quick corrections that looked accidental but happened too frequently to be coincidental. "Dwight, be more careful," I called out during our first rest stop. "You nearly hit me back there." "Sorry, Dad." His voice carried through the crystalline air. "These machines are harder to control than I remembered." Harder to control? Yesterday during practice, he'd shown off with theatrical maneuvers and perfect handling. Now he claimed difficulty with basic steering. As we continued deeper into the wilderness, his mistakes became more frequent. Close approaches that forced me to brake hard or swerve sharply. Each incident looked plausible individually, but collectively they formed a disturbing pattern. "Maybe we should take a break," I suggested after the fourth near collision. "You look tired." "No, we need to stick to schedule." His answer came too quickly, too firmly. "I want to show you a special place." A special place. The phrase echoed ominously as I watched him check his GPS with no unusual intensity. We were already 40 miles from base camp, traveling through terrain so remote that even Elmer had called it advanced territory. The landscape around us stretched endlessly in every direction. No landmarks, no shelter, no signs of human presence. Just white tundra broken occasionally by wind-carved ice formations that looked like abstract sculptures. Beautiful, but utterly alien. My fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, but something nagged at my engineer's instincts. During pre-departure checks, I'd noticed Dwight spending extra time around my snowmobile, claiming to help with preparation. At the time, his assistance had seemed thoughtful. Now it felt sinister. "How much farther to this special viewing spot?" I asked during another brief stop. Dwight consulted his GPS again, that strange intensity flickering across his features. "Not far now, maybe another hour into the really isolated areas." Isolated. He kept using that word, emphasizing it like a selling point rather than a danger. But isolation in the Arctic meant death if anything went wrong. No rescue, no shelter, no chance of survival without proper preparation. The radio crackled with static as we moved farther from base camp. Even our communication equipment was starting to lose signal strength. Soon we'd be completely cut off from civilization, dependent entirely on our own resources and each other's goodwill. I glanced at Dwight's snowmobile and noticed something that made my blood freeze despite the insulated suit. His fuel gauge showed nearly full, while mine had dropped to just over half. Same engines, same riding conditions, same departure time. There was no logical reason for such different consumption rates. unless someone had tampered with my fuel supply. "Dwight," I called out, urgency creeping into my voice. "My fuel indicator is showing problems. We should head back." He pulled up beside me, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of that terrible dinner conversation. The same cold calculation, the same frightening absence of filial love. "Don't worry, Dad. That's just a broken sensor." His smile carried no warmth. "You definitely have a full tank." The engine coughed once, twice, then died with a mechanical wheeze that echoed across the empty tundra. Sudden silence enveloped us. No motor noise, no radio static, just the whisper of Arctic wind across endless white expanse. I tried the starter repeatedly. Nothing. The fuel gauge needle rested firmly on empty, exactly where broken sensors don't typically point. Dwight pulled up beside my motionless machine, his engine still purring smoothly. Through his helmet visor, I caught a glimpse of something that chilled me more than the negative 31-degree air. He was smiling. "What a shame, Daddy." His voice carried across the crystalline silence with perfect clarity. "Looks like you'll get to meet those polar bears after all." The words hit me like physical blows. Daddy? He hadn't called me that since childhood. And the reference to polar bears echoed his dinner table, wish that my days would end sooner. "Dwight, what are you talking about?" But even as I asked, my engineer's mind was rapidly calculating the reality. 43 miles from base camp. Temperature minus 31 Fahrenheit. No shelter, no fuel, no radio contact. "You really should have listened more carefully to Melissa's warnings," he continued conversationally. "Arctic conditions don't forgive mistakes. And unfortunately, Dad, you've made a very serious mistake." "What mistake?" My voice sounded strange in the vast emptiness. "Trusting your loving son." The mask had finally dropped completely. No more false enthusiasm, no more pretended affection. Just cold, calculating ambition wearing my child's face. I stared at him through the frigid air, watching vapor clouds form with each breath. "You sabotaged my fuel." "Brilliant deduction, though it took you long enough to figure it out." He revved his engine mockingly. "While you were busy studying those boring safety manuals, I was making practical preparations." The betrayal felt surreal, like watching someone else's nightmare. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride bicycles, helped with homework, walked down the aisle at his wedding. Now he sat calmly discussing my murder, as if planning a business transaction. "The villa isn't worth killing for, Dwight. $8 million says otherwise." His tone remained conversational, almost friendly. "Plus, you're old anyway. I'm just accelerating the inevitable." Cold was already penetrating my protective gear, seeking entry through zippers and seams. Without the snowmobile's engine heat, my survival clock had started ticking. In these conditions, exposed humans typically had hours, not days. "You won't get away with this. Elmer will ask questions." Tragic accident, elderly man ventures too far from safety, runs out of fuel, succumbs to exposure, happens all the time in tourist expeditions. Dwight's planning showed terrifying thoroughness. "I'll report your disappearance like a distraught son. They'll find your body eventually, probably in spring." He gunned his engine, preparing to leave. No goodbye, no final words, no moment of regret or hesitation. Just business efficiency applied to patricide. "Dwight, wait!" But he was already moving, snow spraying from his tracks as he accelerated away from my stranded position. His engine noise faded rapidly in the vast silence, leaving me alone with the wind and the approaching specter of death. I watched his distant figure disappear into white infinity, then turned my attention to immediate survival. Panic would kill me faster than cold. My engineering training had taught me systematic problem-solving under pressure. First priority, shelter from wind. Second, preserve body heat. Third, signal for rescue. Rescue. My hand moved instinctively toward the snowmobile's dashboard, remembering Elmer's detailed explanation of the red button that Dwight had ignored so dismissively. The SOS transmitter, 72 hours of GPS coordinates broadcast directly to emergency services. For the first time since my engine died, I smiled. Dwight's fatal flaw, the same arrogance that had made him dismiss safety protocols, might just save my life. My fingers found the red button exactly where Elmer had demonstrated during yesterday's briefing, such a small device to hold the difference between life and death. I pressed firmly, feeling the slight depression that activated the emergency beacon. Somewhere overhead, satellites were already receiving my coordinates: 71.2906 degrees N, 156.7886 degrees, precise to within 3 meters, Elmer had promised. Now, I had to survive long enough for that precision to matter. The wind cut through my insulated suit like surgical knives. Without the snowmobile's engine warmth, cold became an aggressive predator rather than mere discomfort. I positioned myself on the leeward side of my dead machine, using its bulk as a windbreak while conserving body heat. Thank you, Elmer, for your thorough briefing, I thought, methodically following survival protocols. Keep moving to maintain circulation, but avoid sweating. Preserve energy for the long wait. Monitor for rescue signals. Time became elastic in the white wilderness. Minutes felt like hours while I stamped my feet and flexed my fingers inside insulated gloves. The silence was profound. No birds, no insects, just wind whispering across endless tundra. Then I heard it. The distant drone of engines growing steadily louder. 2 snowmobiles appeared on the horizon, moving fast and purposefully toward my position. The lead rider wore the distinctive red parka of Base Camp Emergency Services. Behind him, another rescuer pulled a specialized medical sled. "Mr. Whitaker?" The first man reached me within minutes, his machine skidding to a stop beside my improvised shelter. "I'm Vernon Hayes, rescue coordinator. Are you injured?" "Just cold." My voice came out hoarse from the dry air. "How did you find me so quickly?" "Your SOS signal came through perfectly. We had your exact coordinates within seconds." Vernon was already checking my vital signs with professional efficiency. "What happened out here?" The question I'd been dreading. "How do you explain that your only son tried to murder you?" "My son? He left me without fuel." Vernon's expression shifted from concern to something harder. "That's a serious accusation, sir. Abandonment in Arctic conditions is attempted murder under Alaska law." The second rescuer, a woman named Janet Kruger, was preparing medical equipment from her sled. "Sir, we need to get you back to base immediately. Early signs of hypothermia are setting in." They worked with practiced efficiency, wrapping me in heated blankets and monitoring my temperature during the journey back. The base camp buildings appeared surprisingly quickly. Rescue response had been faster than I'd dared hope. "Your core temperature dropped to 94 degrees, Janet explained as she supervised my treatment in the medical facility. Another hour out there would have been dangerous. Vernon pulled up a chair beside my recovery bed. "Mr. Whitaker, about what happened today. Do you want to file an official report?" I considered the implications: legal charges against my own son, public scandal, family destruction, broadcast in court records. But Dwight had crossed a line from greed into attempted murder. "Yes," I said finally. "I want to file a report. We'll need a detailed statement about the events leading to your abandonment." Vernon's tone remained professionally neutral. "Also, our GPS tracking shows your son's snowmobile returning to base camp about 30 minutes ago." 30 minutes. Dwight was probably already celebrating his successful murder, perhaps rehearsing his performance as the grieving son who'd lost his father to tragic accident. "He doesn't know about the SOS system," I realized aloud. "What do you mean?" "He ignored yesterday's safety briefing, signed the waivers without listening. He has no idea that snowmobiles broadcast location data during emergencies." Vernon's expression grew grimmer. "So he thinks you're still stranded out there?" "He thinks I'm dying." The words tasted bitter. "He planned this carefully, sabotaged my fuel, led me to a remote location, then abandoned me to exposure. He believes it's the perfect murder." Janet finished her medical checks and stepped back. "Mr. Whitaker, you're stable now. The warming protocol worked perfectly. When will I be ready to travel?" "You can leave the medical bay whenever you feel strong enough, though I'd recommend rest before any strenuous activity." Vernon stood up, his hand resting on his radio. "Mr. Whitaker, your son doesn't know you've been rescued yet. Would you like to be present when we confront him with the evidence?" Janet finished checking my vital signs with professional efficiency, her instruments confirming what my body already knew. I would survive. The frostbite on my fingertips remained minor. Circulation had returned to normal, and my core temperature had stabilized at 97 degrees. "Remarkable recovery, Mr. Whitaker." She packed away her medical equipment with satisfied precision. Another hour in those conditions would have been critical. Vernon pulled his chair closer, his expression grave with official concern. Sir, we need to discuss next steps. Your son committed attempted murder under Alaska law. Abandonment in Arctic conditions with intent to cause death. That's a serious felony. I stared at the ceiling tiles, processing the weight of legal terminology applied to my own child. What would happen if we pressed charges? Investigation, arrest warrant, extradition to Alaska for trial. Given the GPS evidence and rescue service testimony, conviction would be virtually certain. Vernon's tone remained professionally neutral. 25 years minimum sentence. 25 years. Dwight would emerge from prison an old man, his life destroyed by his own greed. Part of me craved that justice, but another part, the father who had once taught him to ride bicycles, hesitated. Give me time to think. This is complex. Of course. But Mr. Whitaker, there's something else you should consider. Vernon leaned forward conspiratorially. Your son doesn't know you survived. He thinks his plan worked perfectly. The implications crystallized in my engineer's mind like ice forming on glass. Dwight would return expecting condolences and inheritance discussions. He'd walk into base camp confident in his successful murder, completely unprepared for the impossible reality of my survival. When do you expect him back? Vernon checked his watch. Radio contact suggests approximately 2 hours. He's taking his time, probably crafting his story about searching for rescue help. 2 hours to prepare the most devastating confrontation of my son's life. I reached into my inner jacket pocket, fingers finding the envelope I'd carried from Florida, documents I'd brought specifically for this trip, though not for the reasons I'd originally intended. Vernon, I have something that might interest you. I withdrew the legal papers, their edges slightly damp from Arctic moisture, but text still perfectly legible. These are inheritance transfer documents. I brought them thinking Dwight and I might reconcile, that I might actually sign ownership of the villa over to him. Vernon examined the paperwork with growing understanding. You were considering giving him exactly what he tried to murder you for? Ironic, isn't it? I felt a cold smile forming on my lips. He could have had everything legally, but his impatience and greed turned him into a would-be killer. Janet, who'd been quietly organizing medical supplies, looked up with sudden comprehension. You're planning something. Justice, I corrected. Sometimes the legal system isn't the only path to appropriate consequences. Vernon studied my face carefully. What are you thinking? I'm thinking my son deserves to experience the full impact of his choices. He wanted me dead to inherit the villa. Let him think that plan succeeded, right up until the moment he discovers the true cost of attempted murder. You want to confront him yourself. I want him to understand that actions have consequences, that the father he tried to kill had the power to give him everything, and now has the power to take it all away. Vernon nodded slowly. We'll be here as witnesses, for your protection and to document anything that happens. The sound of distant snowmobile engines drifted through the base camp walls, growing steadily louder. My pulse quickened despite my determination to remain calm. After 43 years of fatherhood, I was about to meet my son as a stranger, a man who'd revealed himself capable of cold-blooded murder. He's coming, Janet whispered, moving toward the window. I folded the inheritance papers carefully and placed them on the table beside my chair. Everything depended on timing, on letting Dwight believe his plan had succeeded before destroying his world with surgical precision. The engine noise stopped outside. Footsteps approached the building entrance. Heavy boots stomped in the entrance hallway as Dwight removed his Arctic gear, each sound echoing through the small base camp like countdown seconds. I positioned myself in the common room's main chair, inheritance documents folded neatly on my lap, Vernon and Janet flanking me as silent witnesses. The door opened. Dwight entered expecting condolences and found his supposedly dead father sitting calmly in a heated room, very much alive. His face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion, disbelief, then raw panic as reality crashed against his assumptions. Dad! The word exploded from his throat like a physical wound. How did you get here? Hello, son. My voice carried the steady calm of an engineer discussing technical specifications. I have a surprise for you. But the snowmobile, you ran out of fuel. His hands trembled as his mind struggled to process the impossible. I went to get help. I rode back as fast as I could. Really? Is that what happened? I held up the folded documents, watching his eyes lock onto them, like a predator spotting prey. Well, regardless of your heroic rescue attempts, I'm here now, and I brought something special. His gaze fixed on the papers with unmistakable hunger. Even in shock, his greed remained intact. What are those? The inheritance transfer documents I mentioned during our planning, legal papers transferring full ownership of the Palm Beach villa to you. I let the words sink in, watching hope bloom in his eyes despite the impossible circumstances. Exactly what you wanted, right? Yes, that's exactly what I wanted. His voice cracked with desperate longing. Dad, about today, I can explain everything. There was a malfunction, and I had to leave you to get professional help. Of course you did. I unfolded the documents slowly, letting him see the official letterhead and legal language. $8 million worth of prime Florida real estate, your inheritance, your future financial security. Dwight stepped closer, drawn by the magnetic pull of wealth despite his confusion about my survival. You're really going to sign those? I was going to sign them before today's malfunction? I held the papers up to eye level, studying them as if considering the decision. Before I understood what kind of man my son had become. Dad, I don't understand what you're implying. Let me help you understand. My voice dropped to the temperature of Arctic wind. You sabotaged my fuel system. You led me to the most remote location possible. You abandoned me to die of exposure so you could inherit this villa without waiting for natural causes. His face went white as fresh snow. That's insane. I would never... The GPS tracking data shows your snowmobile stationary beside mine for the exact period when my engine failed. Rescue services have precise coordinates and time stamps. Vernon's professional voice cut through Dwight's stammering denials. The evidence is conclusive. Dwight's shoulders sagged as his fabricated story crumbled, but his eyes remained fixed on the inheritance documents, calculating whether confession might still lead to financial reward. Okay, he whispered. Maybe I did make some mistakes in judgment. But Dad, we can work this out. Family is family, right? You're absolutely right. Family is family. I stood up slowly, holding the documents at arm's length. And family means everything to me. These papers represent 40 years of work, my entire life's achievement, my legacy for the next generation. Hope flickered in his eyes like candlelight. Which is why, I continued, I'm making sure you receive exactly what you deserve. I tore the documents in half. The sound of ripping paper cut through the room like gunfire. Dwight lunged forward with a strangled cry, but the pieces were already falling like snow, his $8 million inheritance scattered across the floor in worthless fragments. Now you have exactly what you've earned through attempted murder, I said quietly. Nothing. The torn pieces of inheritance documents lay scattered around Dwight's feet like the debris of his shattered dreams. He knelt among them, gathering fragments with trembling hands as if paper could somehow be reassembled into fortune. You can't do this, he whispered. It's my inheritance. I'm your only son. You were my only son. Now you're a stranger who tried to commit murder. I stepped around his kneeling form, moving toward the exit. Vernon, thank you for the rescue. You saved more than my life today. Where will you go now? Vernon asked, understanding that this chapter was closing. Home, to make some permanent changes. Dwight looked up from his worthless paper fragments. Dad, please, we can fix this. Family counseling, therapy, whatever you want. I'll change, I promise. I stopped at the doorway without turning around. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. You made your choice in that tundra. Now live with the consequences. The flight from Barrow to Anchorage to Miami gave me 18 hours to process the complete transformation of my family. Outside the airplane windows, landscapes shifted from Arctic white to temperate green to tropical blue, each transition marking distance from the nightmare my son had created. Mary, I thought, staring at clouds below, our son learned the lesson he deserved. Not the lesson we hoped to teach him, but the one his actions earned. The Palm Beach villa felt different when I finally unlocked the front door. Warm Florida air embraced me like a living thing after the Arctic's frozen hostility. But the house itself seemed lighter somehow, freed from the burden of Dwight's expectations and schemes. My first call was to Robert Steinberg, the family attorney who'd handled our legal affairs for 20 years. Harlan, good to hear from you. How was Alaska? Educational. Robert, I need to change my will immediately. Complete revision. Of course. What modifications are you considering? The villa goes to the Children's Cancer Foundation, everything else to various charities. Nothing to Dwight. Silence stretched across the phone connection. Harlan, that's a significant change. Are you certain? Absolutely certain. Draft the papers today. I'll sign them tomorrow. May I ask what prompted this decision? My son tried to murder me for the inheritance. I survived. He didn't get what he wanted, and now he never will. 3 weeks later, the legal documentation was complete and filed with the county clerk's office. The villa that Dwight had been willing to kill for would instead provide treatment for children fighting for their lives, a legacy that honored Mary's memory instead of rewarding her son's betrayal. I never heard from Dwight again. No calls, no letters, no attempts at reconciliation. Perhaps he finally understood that some lines, once crossed, eliminate all possibility of return. Or perhaps he simply moved on to other schemes, other targets for his mercenary affections. The inheritance that had consumed his thoughts now served a higher purpose. Sick children would find healing in medical facilities funded by the sale of our family home. Their families would experience hope where Dwight had chosen greed. Life would flourish where he had planted death. Standing on the villa's terrace one evening, watching sunset paint the Atlantic in shades of gold and crimson, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Mary's passing: genuine peace. The cold that had lived in my heart since that terrible dinner conversation had finally thawed. True inheritance isn't houses or money. It's values, love, and the positive impact we leave on the world. Dwight forgot this fundamental truth, but through his very betrayal, he helped me remember it. The ocean whispered against our private beach, carrying away the last echoes of family disappointment and replacing them with the promise of meaningful legacy. Somewhere in the distance, a child would laugh in a hospital playroom, funded by transformation born from tragedy. That laughter was worth more than any villa. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.